I brought the mug home. From the second firm. I don't know why I washed it before I left. The administrator had already arrived. The building was being sealed, but I stood at the little kitchen on the third floor, and I washed my mug, and I dried it with a paper towel, and I put it in my bag. I have 2 mugs now. My name is Alison Reid. I am a risk compliance officer. I have worked in investment management for 19 years. Between June 2022 and February 2023, I filed 17 escalations at Meridian Property Partners, documenting a £420 million leveraged position in regional UK commercial real estate. The position was financed at a blended cost rising from 4.2% to 6.1% against assets yielding 3.8%. The fund was paying more to hold the assets than the assets were generating. The monthly shortfall reached £800,000. At 09:03 on March 9, 2023, I filed my final escalation flagging immediate liquidity crisis. At 14:47 that afternoon, the administrator was appointed. £280 million of pension fund capital was irrecoverable. Recoveries were 11 pence in the pound. All 17 escalations were acknowledged. All were logged. All were reviewed. This was the second firm where I had filed escalations before collapse. The second time, I knew it would be ignored. That is what I want you to understand. Meridian Property Partners was a mid-sized London fund, regional commercial real estate, office parks outside Birmingham, retail centres in the north, industrial estates past the M25. Not glamorous, not innovative, just steady yield for pension funds. That was the pitch. The mechanism was simple. Meridian borrowed money at a fixed rate to buy commercial properties generating rental income. The difference between the borrowing cost and the rental yield was the profit. When that difference is positive, the fund makes money. When it is negative, the fund loses money every single day it holds the position. In June 2022, Meridian opened a £420 million position, financed at 4.2% against assets yielding 3.8%. Negative 0.4% on £420 million. £168,000 per month. From day one. I filed my first escalation on June 23, 2022. Subject line: negative carry on primary position. Yield shortfall quantified. I attached the calculations. I summarized the issue in 3 bullets. The position was losing money on the carry. The interest rate environment was rising. The fund had 18 months of reserves at current burn, assuming no deterioration. It was acknowledged in 40 minutes. Status under review. When the Bank of England raised rates to 4% in February 2023, the refinancing cost moved to 6.1%. The monthly shortfall became £800,000. 18 million in reserves divided by 0.8 million per month equals 22.5 months of runway. But there would be redemptions. There were always redemptions, and the yield was deteriorating. February occupancy data was down. I filed my 17th escalation at 09:03 on March 9th. Subject line: refinancing costs exceed asset yield. Immediate liquidity review required. I pressed send at 9:03. By 11 the calls had stopped. Not all at once. It wasn't dramatic, but the phone system has a rhythm. You learn it. You know what a Thursday morning sounds like. Calls transferring, hold music bleeding through, people walking quickly past your desk, talking into mobiles. By 11 it was quieter than it should have been. I walked down to the second floor. Martin's office door was closed. Martin never closed his door. The lights were on in the conference room, but no one was inside. I went back upstairs. I made a cup of tea at 1:15. The kitchen was empty. I used the same mug I always used, white ceramic, Meridian logo. I took the tea back to my desk and I checked my email. Nothing. I checked the escalation system. Status. Received. No assignment. I checked the shared drive. The February reconciliation files had not been uploaded. I drank the tea. At 2:30 I heard the lift. Different footsteps. I knew the footsteps in that building. I had worked there 4 years. These were different footsteps. Purposeful. Unfamiliar. 2 people, men, moving toward the corner offices. I stood up. I don't know why, I just stood. I could see Martin's office from my desk. The door opened. The 2 men went in. Martin did not come out. I looked at the clock on my screen. 14:47. I sat back down. I finished my tea. It had gone cold. I took the mug to the kitchen. I washed it. I dried it with a paper towel. I folded the paper towel and put it in the bin. I put the mug in my bag. Then I went back to my desk and I waited. The first time was different. The first firm was Barrington Wade, equity fund, smaller, I was younger. I believed the escalation system worked because it was a system. I believed if you documented risk correctly, someone acted on it because that was the purpose of documentation. I filed 11 escalations at Barrington Wade over 14 months. Concentrated position risk, single sector exposure, inadequate liquidity buffers. The fund collapsed in April 2018. Client money was frozen. I was escorted out by security with everyone else. I stood on the pavement with a box of my things and I thought, this was a failure of process. I thought, the next firm will have better process. Meridian had better process. Meridian had templates. Meridian had severity categories. Meridian had escalation pathways and acknowledgement protocols and quarterly risk committee reviews attended by non-executive directors. I filed 17 escalations in 8 months. Everyone was acknowledged. Everyone was logged. Everyone was reviewed. I have the confirmations. I kept them. I kept everything the second time. When you file the same escalation 17 times, you start noticing things. The reply times get longer. The first escalation at Meridian was acknowledged in 40 minutes. The 10th took 6 days. The 17th was never acknowledged. The language softens. Urgent review required becomes noted for discussion, becomes under advisement, becomes thank you for raising this. The meetings get postponed, then rescheduled, then converted to email updates, then the email updates stop. You are still filing, the system is still logging, but something has detached. By the 14th escalation, I knew. I knew the way you know a relationship is over before anyone says it. I knew the way you know the verdict before the jury comes back. I knew. But I kept filing. What else do you do? The 17th escalation I filed at 09:03 on March 9th. I had written it the night before, at home. I didn't usually write them at home, but the February refinancing data had finally been posted at 6:40 on the 8th, and I knew what it meant as soon as I saw it. The blended cost had moved to 6.1%. We were paying 6.1% to hold assets yielding 3.8% on £420 million. The monthly shortfall was $800,000. We had $18 million in liquid reserves. I did the math 3 times. 18 divided by 0.8, 22.5, 22.5 months of runway at current burn, assuming no redemptions and no further rate rises and no deterioration in asset yield. But there would be redemptions. There were always redemptions once the letters started. And there would be further rises. The bank had signalled it, and the yield was deteriorating. February's occupancy data was down. I wrote the escalation at my kitchen table. I used the template. I attached the calculations. I summarized the risk in 3 bullet points. Liquidity crisis imminent. debt service unsustainable, immediate review required. I saved it as a draft. I went to bed. I didn't sleep. I got up at 5:30. I reread the escalation. I changed one word. Immediate to urgent. Then I changed it back. I filed it at 09:03. At 14:47, the administrator arrived. 5 hours and 44 minutes. I have thought about those 5 hours many times. What was happening while I was drinking tea? What calls were being made? What lawyers were being briefed? What documents were being prepared? Was my escalation read? Did anyone open it? Did it make any difference at all that I had filed it, or would the administrator have arrived at 14:47 regardless? I don't know. But I know I filed it. And I know what happened after. The building was sealed at 5. They let us collect personal items. 1 box. Security watched. I put the mug in my bag before they came round. I didn't want it in the box. I don't know why. I just didn't want them to see it. I left at 5:15. There were journalists outside. Not many. 3, maybe 4. One tried to ask me something. I walked past. I took the tube home. I put the mug in the cupboard next to the first one. 2 mugs. White ceramic, different logos. The second time you watch a firm collapse after ignoring your escalations, you realize something. It is not a failure of process. It is not a failure of communication. It is not a failure of oversight or governance or risk culture or any of the things the reports will say when the reports are finally published. It is a decision. Someone decided the risk was acceptable. Someone decided the yield was worth it. Someone decided the escalations could wait. Someone decided 18 months of runway was enough time to solve the problem or sell the position or find new capital or let it become someone else's problem. Someone decided. And then the decisions ran out. I have been asked if I feel angry. I don't feel angry. I feel £280 million of pension money was gone. The fund was liquidated over 6 months. Recoveries were 11 pence in the pound. 11 pence. That means someone who had £10,000 in their pension in February had £1,100 in August. Someone who had £50,000 had £5,500. Someone who was planning to retire in 2 years now cannot retire in 10. The math is very simple. I have the escalations, all 17. I printed them after Meridian. I didn't print them at Barrington Wade. I didn't think I needed to. The second time I printed everything. They are in a folder, blue, in my flat, on the shelf above my desk. Sometimes I take the folder down. I read them. I check the dates. I check the numbers. I make sure I did not imagine it. I make sure I filed them. I make sure they said what I remember them saying. They did. I filed them. I said what needed to be said. I used the right words. I followed the process. I marked them urgent when they were urgent and critical when they were critical. And no one acted. I am working now. A different firm, pension fund, infrastructure, long-dated assets, very conservative, very stable. I have filed 2 escalations since I started. Both were acknowledged in 24 hours. Both were actioned. Both were resolved. I've been here 7 months. I keep a folder, just in case. The thing no one tells you about filing escalations is that they create a record. They prove you saw it. They prove you said something. They prove that when the crisis came, you were not silent. But they do not prove anyone listened. They do not prove it mattered. They prove you filed. That is all they prove. I have 2 mugs. I do not use them. They are in the back of the cupboard behind the ones I bought after. I see them sometimes when I am looking for something else. White ceramic, different logos, both from firms that no longer exist. I do not know why I kept them. I do not know why I washed the second one before I left. But I did. I washed it and I dried it, and I put it in my bag and I brought it home. The administrator arrived at 14:47. I filed at 09:03. 5 hours and 44 minutes. I filed because that is what you do. You see the risk. You document it. You escalate it. You press send. And then you wait for footsteps you've never heard before. There were 14 people on the floor when the administrator arrived. 12 sat down. 2 were standing by the printer. One of them was laughing. I remember that specifically. She was laughing at something on her phone, and then she looked up and she stopped. The administrator wore a dark suit. Navy, not black. She carried a briefcase and a clipboard. She did not knock. She walked directly to the managing director's office and she closed the door. The woman by the printer put her phone in her pocket. Someone said, "Who is that?" No one answered. I knew. I knew because I had seen it before. I knew because of the clipboard. I knew because she did not look at anyone. I knew because at 09:03 I had pressed send on an escalation that detailed a £7.2 million exposure on a contract that had been signed without adequate due diligence. And I knew because it was now 14:47 and the person who had signed that contract was behind the closed door with a woman who carried a clipboard. The first time I escalated something that mattered, I was 29. I'd been qualified for 3 years. I found a discrepancy in a revenue recognition model. Not small. £4.6 million spread across 18 months. Recorded as earned. Not yet delivered. Not yet contracted in some cases. I flagged it in an email. My manager thanked me. He said he would look into it. He said it was probably a timing issue. 2 weeks later, I asked about it again. He said he was still checking. 3 weeks after that, the revenue appeared in the quarterly results. Unchanged. I printed the email I had sent. I printed the revenue model. I printed the contract schedules. I put them in a folder. I labeled it Escalation Revenue Recognition Issue. I sent it to the CFO. He called me into his office. He did not sit down. He stood by the window and he asked me if I understood the impact of what I was suggesting. I said I understood the impact of what the numbers were showing. He asked me if I had discussed this with my manager. I said I had. He asked me if my manager had agreed with my assessment. I said my manager had said he was looking into it. He asked me how long I had been with the firm. I said 3 years. He said 3 years. Not as a question, as a statement. He thanked me for bringing it to his attention. He said he would review it personally. He asked me to keep the matter confidential while he looked into it. I said I would. I left the folder on his desk. The administrator stayed in the managing director's office for 41 minutes. At 15:28 she came out. She was followed by the managing director and the head of finance. The managing director looked at the floor. The head of finance looked at me. Just for a moment. Then he looked away. The administrator stood in the center of the floor. She said her name. She said the name of her firm. She said that the company had entered administration. She said we would receive further information by email within the hour. She said we should collect our personal belongings. She said we should not remove any company property. She said we should leave our access cards on our desks. She said we would be paid for the current month. She did not say we would be paid after that. The woman who had been laughing by the printer started crying. No one moved. Then someone stood up. Then someone else. I stayed seated. I opened my email. I forwarded my 0903 escalation to my personal account. I attached the supporting documentation. 7 files. 43 megabytes. I pressed send. Then I closed my laptop. At my first firm, the CFO reviewed the folder. He took 6 days. On the 7th day, he called a meeting. My manager was there. The financial controller was there. I was there. The CFO said he had reviewed my concerns. He said he had discussed them with the external auditors. He said the revenue recognition approach was consistent with industry practice. He said there were complexities I might not fully understand given my level of experience. He said he appreciated my diligence. He said going forward I should route any concerns through my direct manager. He said this would ensure a more coordinated approach. My manager nodded. The financial controller said nothing. I said, "So the revenue stands?" The CFO said, "The revenue is appropriate." I said, "Even though the services haven't been delivered." He said, "The contracts are binding." I said, "3 of the contracts haven't been signed." The room was very quiet. The CFO looked at the financial controller. The financial controller looked at my manager. My manager looked at his hands. The CFO said, "Thank you, Alison. We'll take it from here." I started looking for a new job that afternoon. I found one in 11 weeks. I gave 4 weeks' notice. During my last week, the CFO resigned. No announcement. No leaving drinks. His office was empty on a Tuesday morning. Someone said he had taken another position. Someone else said it was a mutual decision. No one said anything about the revenue. I left on a Friday. Standard exit interview. Standard exit paperwork. I handed in my access card. I took the mug from my desk. I went home. On Monday, I started my new job. On Wednesday, the FCA announced an investigation into my former employer. On Friday, the firm entered administration. 53 people lost their jobs. I was not one of them. At 15:47, I put my laptop in my bag. I took the photo frame from my desk. I took the plant that had been there when I arrived. I took the mug. I left the access card face up next to my keyboard. I did not say goodbye to anyone. I did not look back. I walked to the lift. I pressed the button. I waited. The head of finance was standing by the stairwell. He was not leaving. He was just standing there. He said, "You knew?" I did not answer. He said, "You filed this morning." I said, "I filed when I identified the risk." He said, "You must have known it was too late." I said, "That wasn't my determination to make." He laughed. Not a real laugh. He said, "You're going to be fine, aren't you?" The lift arrived. I stepped in. I pressed ground floor. I said, "I filed at 9:03. The doors closed. That evening, I updated my folder. I added the escalation. I added the supporting files. I added a document that listed the timeline. Every date. Every email. Every meeting. Every decision I had flagged. Every response I had received. I saved it. I backed it up. I backed up the backup. 3 weeks later, I received a letter from the administrator. Standard template. It thanked me for my service. It confirmed my final payment. It listed the redundancy terms. It included a reference. One paragraph. Professional. Neutral. Adequate. I did not frame it. I have been at this firm for 7 months. My folder has 2 entries. Both resolved. Both closed. Both filed correctly. I do not think about the people who lost their jobs. That is not true. I think about them. But I do not carry them. I filed. I escalated. I documented. I did what you are supposed to do. The thing about being right is that it does not feel like anything. You are not vindicated. You are not relieved. You are not satisfied. You are simply the person who filed at 0903, and everyone else is the person who did not. I keep the mugs in the cupboard. I keep the folder up to date. I keep my personal email open, just in case. This firm is stable. For now. They always are. Until they are not.